Welcome to WitchLit, a podcast where we talk about the craft of writing and writing the craft. I'm your host, Victoria Raschke, fiction author, witch, and nosy Scorpio. Bioengineered to be the only redhead in a generation of blondes, Lulu M. Sylvian feels like aliens might actually be the best answer for a lifetime of being asked, where did you get that red hair from? She did not come into writing from years of scribbling words on paper. Her background is rooted in visual arts and making pictures. Encouraged to make those pictures out of words, Lulu began writing just to see what would happen. What happened was 2 full-length manuscripts in 3 months, much to her surprise. She writes sexy, hot, paranormal, and ridiculous contemporary romances. Lulu cannot ride a horse, a motorcycle, spin a hula hoop, or play roller derby. Yes, she has attempted all of those, even if it has been decades since she's been on a horse or a motorcycle. She embraces the crazy that comes with the one little genetic mutation and attempts to live up to the reputation that precedes her as a redhead. Lulu would like to apologize for her contribution to the hole in the ozone layer from her use of hairspray in the 1980s. Lulu M. Sylvian, welcome to WitchLit.
Thank you.
I'm so glad you're on, and I'm going to do my standard full disclosure that Lulu and I are friends. So,
okay.
We know each other, so there may be a little different banter than usual. Let's put it that way.
I should probably go. I'm really excited to be here. I honestly don't know what to say at this point. So other than this is cool. Thank you.
Well, good. I'm so glad you could do this. And, I'll ask questions and then you'll figure out what to say to those. So it'll be fun. So standard first question for everyone. Why write?
To get the voices in my head to shut up. Honestly. So, in my bio, you notice that I didn't grow up being a writer, so I don't have this drive to tell stories. I've had movies in my head that needed to get out, and I am not a filmmaker. And a lot of times those movies can't be shown in a single image. So, can't paint them. And my ability to do comic books died in my 20s. And I basically have these characters and these situations, and they show up and they are not quiet. They're very noisy. And so the best way to get them to stop looping in my head and in my imagination is to regurgitate them onto paper. So.
Well, it seems to be working for the most part, from what I could tell. So I guess so that was kind of the process of figuring out, okay, I need to write, but how did you actually sit down and go, okay, here's a book, here's what I'm going to do to get this published? How did that arc go for you?
So the whole writing process is very kind of weird. Again, because I was never going to be a writer. In my family, my sister was the writer. Not me. I drew, I painted. And for one of my birthdays, oh gosh, maybe 15 years ago, my husband gave me this really cool Batman bag, and he filled it with notebooks and pens and said, get writing. I'm like, dude, I don't write. You're the one who wants to write. But okay. I did not start writing at that point, however. What happened was I used to be an adjunct for several community colleges, and I ended up one semester with no classes anywhere. So essentially I was unemployed and I needed to do something. And there's always been that, oh, you could write a book, you have the ideas, da 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 da. So I decided I have the time. This, one of those things you always hear people say is, well, if I had the time, I'd do it. I only had time because all I was doing was filling out job applications and watching TV. I had time. So I'm like, I'm going to write. I'm going to continue working. Even though I'm not employed, I'm going to keep myself working, because if you're working, other jobs happen, right? There's that whole premise. It's always easier to get a job if you have a job.
Yes.
So I was going to, So I gave myself a job in addition to filling out job applications, and I cranked out the first book in 6 weeks.
As someone who writes really slowly, I have to say I have a tiny bit of envy there.
Well, it's because, like I said, I've got these things lodged in my head and they're very noisy, and they are telling it. I actually went to a book signing with another author, and somebody asked her the question, and she said, oh, I don't make this stuff up. The characters come in my brain. They tell me what to write down. And I'm like, oh, I'm not insane. Because that's how it feels sometimes. So
I have described writing sometimes like channeling your characters. Yeah.
Yeah. It very much is that. It I know for some people the process isn't that way, but for me, that is definitely the process. I mean, totally weird. I had to drive a couple weeks ago, and my schedule was just getting packed, and I needed to get the next couple episodes of my serial that's on my website done. I'm like, okay, I'm going to use the voice to text, and I'm just going to transcribe, because otherwise I'm losing 8 hours that I could be writing because I have to drive. And my voice actually changed. I was listening to the recordings because I'm like, I can't figure out what voice to text is a mess, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was listening so I could clean it up. My voice was changing
when you were talking in different characters.
When I was talking in different characters, and I'm like, I don't remember doing that. I don't remember doing that at all. Okay, that's bizarre. It worked fine, whatever, but I don't know if I ever want to listen to that again. And it was very unnerving to go. It's like, wow, because in the serial I have the one character, Mary, who is very prim, very proper, very shrill, and my voice would get shrill, and Marshall is calmer and my voice would get deeper. And I have a Native American character, and my cadence changed, and that freaked me out because I did not realize I was doing that at the time.
Wow. So you mentioned that your schedule is getting really full. And so how much of your life now is writing? And I know you still have a day job, but I'm going to ask you, I mean, I know, it's not 100% writing, but how much, and do you, when you introduce yourself to people, do you say, oh, I'm a writer, and then you tell them your day job, or what does that percentage of your life is writing, I guess?
Well, so that also took place just before Christmas. So Christmas had all the other Christmas stuff on top of it. For the past few years, I have treated writing like my full-time job, and I do have a part-time desk job. And it's all gig work, right? And on top of that, I had a part-time job as an adjunct. So my adjuncting ended at the end of spring of 2020. I haven't had a class since. And so then I've been able to put more time into writing, and I picked up a gig as a ghostwriter. So I've been ghostwriting part-time. I've got the desk job part-time, and then I write my own stuff part-time. So as a writer, I'm writing on a full-time basis between between writing my own stuff and writing for the ghostwriting place, that is equivalent of a full-time job time-wise.
So is it equivalent of a full-time job wise, compensation wise?
It's all gig work. So
I ask you like I don't also live on gig work. So yeah.
Right. And unfortunately gig work sometimes does and sometimes doesn't. So, the benefit of being a ghostwriter is that once I've finished the project, I am paid. And that is beautiful and lovely and wonderful. Mm-hmm. The problem with being a self-published author is when I finish the project, I don't necessarily get paid unless I'm getting those page reads in KU or I'm making the sales. So that adds the next part-time job of, hey, now I'm a marketing professional, which, by the way, I am not. That one's a struggle. But
yeah, and it's a struggle for me too.
Yeah.
So in this world of many hats, what does a perfect day of writing look like for you? Do you have like rituals around writing, or are you precious about it? Or I mean, you're dictating in a car. I'm guessing you're not too precious about it, but like what does a perfect writing session look like for you?
I don't think there is one yet. I used to be very precious about it. I couldn't have music with words. I hated people being around me. And I couldn't have other people making noise. So I was like, I have a certain music score, film score, radio on Pandora, and I could write to that. And then my productivity wasn't very high because I was being very, very particular. Excuse me. And something switched, and I don't know where, and I don't know how, and I don't know when, but I started to be able to write to music with words not in English. So I was listening to a lot of Turkish pop, or a lot of K-pop, a lot of the Latin workout radio on Pandora, which, by the way, is a great station. And so I could have words, as long as they weren't in English, I could have words. And then I hit another switch and I can write to, it can have English words. I'm no longer trying to transcribe, because when I started, I was always trying to transcribe what I was hearing instead of getting the words out of my head. So something has since changed, and I can write with movies on. I can write with people around. I don't do well if the people are milling about and moving back and forth and trying to talk to me a lot. So, but it doesn't freak me out, and it doesn't completely pull me out of, I was writing and I can't write anymore. You have interrupted the flow. I don't have that anymore. I definitely started off with that, but I don't have that anymore. And I think part of that is I can't afford to. I've got deadlines. My ghostwriting clients need things done by a certain time, and I have to meet those deadlines or I don't get paid. So, but the transition from being very precious to my writing time to whatever, just let me write, happened prior to picking up the ghostwriting gig. And so I don't know exactly when it happened, but it did. So it had to have happened prior to the pandemic shutdown, when everybody was home too, because it's only been 2 years.
Only 2 years.
Only 2 years. Ugh, sorry. And I've been I guess I want to call it writing in noise. So I've been writing in noise for at least 3 years.
Yeah. I know I always really liked writing in coffee shops because of like the white noise, and like a tiny bit of distraction, and I could look up and look at people's faces if I was having a hard time like imagining them, all those kind of things. And coffee, lots of coffee. And that is like the one thing with the pandemic that has just been such a bummer for me, is I miss my coffee house reset days, because I can write at home fine, but like if I get really stuck, I would always go to the coffee house and like bang out like 4 hours of writing. Not an option these days.
No, unfortunately, it's not.
I'm looking forward to that again, but
yeah, I did for a little bit. I did do some writing in coffee shops, and I called it, writing from the bread cafe. So you can guess where I was writing, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, what I ended up doing was writing about what the people around me were doing, and creating blog posts instead of writing what I was supposed to have been writing.
Yes, there can definitely be like, those conversations that you overhear, like even snatches of, and you're like, what are these people talking about? It's far more interesting than what I'm writing. Yeah, that occasionally happens to me too.
Oh my gosh. I mean, there were so many like board meetings happening in there, and book clubs. And there was this one totally misogynistic old man book club going on. And they like met at the same time every week. And I was in there at the same time because my kid had sports, and I would just throw her at sports and go write. And, it's like, I'm really curious, what the heck is this book? And then I found out what they were reading. I'm like, ew, these cute little old men in their book club are now like a bunch of misogynistic pigs, and I hate them. Ew.
Yeah.
But you grasp onto things like that. The other problem I had with writing at the bread cafe was your table numbers. You could order from your table. And it is the bread cafe, so they have things like bagels and bear claws and all these lovely other things that I should not be eating while I'm writing.
Yeah, I would treat myself, but then mostly stick to coffee. I feel you there. Plus, it gets expensive. I mean, like if you're hitting the coffee house writing circuit hard, it gets pricey. So yep, there's that issue too. So kind of transition a little bit. I was going to ask you specifically about the Wet Waterfalls books, because that's the books of yours I know that have witches in them. So like, based on the label on the outside of the podcast, I thought that would be interesting to talk about. So I'm curious what the seed for that series was, because in your bio, you talk about like ridiculous contemporary fantasy. And I was like, it is like kind of over the top, but it's so much fun. So like, what was the impetus, I guess, for that series?
It's almost embarrassing. It's complete inside joke, which is now going to become an outside joke. I'll tell you. And that is, at one point in time, we were talking in our little publisher group about urban fantasy book covers and having the glowy hands. And somebody somewhere said the glowy hands were, like these orbs they were throwing. And I made the connection from that to Pokemon. Because Pokemon, you throw orbs. Specifically Pokemon Go, sorry. And my husband is a very avid Pokemon Go player. And I like to throw the balls on the phone. You just kind of swipe and make it toss. And the character's name, he goes through, the bad guy character's name goes through several different aliases until you get to what his real name was, which is Jamal. And the catchphrase for Pokemon is "gotta catch them all." And so gotta catch Jamal. And that happened, unfortunately. And that definitely happened during the writing process. So that is not what started it, but that is definitely got in there. So the witch in Wet Waterfall series throws orbs. The witches, they throw orbs, and the orbs have different colors. And in the next mini series from Wet Waterfalls, which I'm currently working on, she is the main character. So in Wet Waterfalls, in Wolves of Wet Waterfalls, which is the mini series, the first mini series,
right.
The witch is not the main character. She's actually a best friend. And she will be the main character in the next miniseries, which is The Witches of Wet Waterfalls. And yes, I like alliteration a lot.
It works. It's catchy, you know. No, I think it works.
And so she throws orbs, and you learn about where does she go to grab the orbs, and sometimes the orbs have different colors, and then the orbs will hold. They become little cells of holding to capture bad essence and bad energies and demons and whatever. But it really, how that particular aspect of the magic and the witching that was in those books happened really is just a Pokemon joke.
I would have never guessed it was a Pokemon joke.
Oh, maybe
so it works.
I edit all of this, and I'm not going to tell that to anybody.
But yeah, I really enjoyed, like, one of the things I loved about the series, though, like you said, you know, it's, you know, it has this basis, this very fun basis, like the relationship between the main character in the first miniseries and her best friends is so key to like the whole story. And it's just fun to watch that evolve. And those characters are really, it's like, I always am interested in books when you so desperately want to know the side character story, because they're real enough people. So I think you did that really well in these. Like, I just really had a good time reading it. And it was just like, you know, especially in the midst of like, you know, whatever the chaos of the world burning down is, it was just a great light read, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So
it for something that is ridiculous, and I will admit it is totally ridiculous. It does have some really dark, hard elements that apparently freaked some people out, some readers out. They weren't prepared for. And part of me was like, it's a book about a serial killer. Come on. There's going to be dark, heavy elements there. But also the main character is just this happy, fluffy, crazy woman who loves color. And I've also gotten pinged with like, she doesn't know how to cuss. You know what? There are adults who don't say the F word ever. I know some. They exist.
Yeah.
And the fact that she cusses creatively, you know, she'll say something about, you know, Zeus's frozen balls or something, but she won't say the F-bomb. And that's just adds to her. And I'm going to say joie de vivre, which is perfect because her magic, she doesn't even realize she's magic. She is the embodiment of joy. And then her best friend is Delight. And Delight is really fun to explore because she is very kawaii, she does Lolita fashion, but she is ace on the spectrum. And then Jade, who is the witch, who is kind of oversees and makes sure that nothing happens to Delight. And then they're just throwing a bunch of hot wolves and whatever.
I mean, that didn't hurt at all.
No.
But I mean, it's funny to me because though I do read romance and I enjoy it, I'm always more invested in like the friendships than the romance story. So I'm always happy when those like play a really big part in the romance. So I'm just convinced that two people can't be romantic in a bubble. Like you have to have some kind of support.
You have to interact in the world.
Yeah.
You know, and in real relationships, how often do we say, they are isolating you from your friends and your family is a red flag.
Right.
So if you're being isolated because of this new relationship, how healthy is that?
Right. No, I think it's lovely, and I hope people will pick it up and read it. So, Witches of Wet Waterfalls is coming. Do you have estimate about when that might happen, when we might get those?
I'm hoping that happens this year. I've contracted with the editor for May, so I've kind of am making it happen. I started it in 2020, and it got very messy with who's doing what and where, because I'm bringing in new characters, bringing in existing characters. Major plot twist at the end of one of the books. I'm like, wait a minute, this is a romance. Can I do that? Because I adhere to, if I want to call the book a romance, it has to have the happy for now or happy ever after at the end. And I know they say when you're in a series, you don't have to, but I think it should. It's like, it's a mini series. They're 3 separate novellas. I still want them to each definitively fit that category. So there's some structure that has to happen.
Makes sense.
But like I said, I've contracted with the editor for May. Therefore, I've got a deadline, and hopefully I'll be able to get it out probably in September.
Oh, good. Well, I look forward to it. So,
yay.
You've written a lot of stuff besides these books that we've talked about. So I'm curious, like, what the role of witches and supernatural beings or magic, like, how do you feel that fits into your work overall? Like, because you write a lot of paranormal romance. So how do those things fit into your work overall?
They're kind of the driving force. I only have one series that doesn't have to be paranormal, and that's what I call ridiculous contemporary. And those are the Holiday Strippers, and those are all short stories. And more than half of them are just straight contemporary, because male strippers are ridiculous enough as they are. But some of those stories are paranormal. Some of them are sci-fi. So, but that's the only place I'll let myself not include the paranormal stuff. And my paranormal isn't just werewolves and vampires and shapeshifters. I do have a series where they're ghosts, and there's reincarnation, and I guess you'd call it body possession, where you've got the spirit of one person taking over the body of somebody else. And so, like, those characters, I had a sensitivity reader on the last one, Fallen Star, because it takes place in Hawaii, and the main character is Hawaiian, and I am not. So I wanted to make sure that I was representing her properly. And that sensitivity reader pointed out that my main character was actually a witch. And she called her a necromancer because she specifically speaks to spirits and interacts with spirits. I'm like, oh yeah, duh. So the female characters all have a level of psychicness, or again, they talk to spirits, they interact with ghosts. So, and then the other characters, of course, are the ghosts and the spirits. So,
right.
Yeah. And then I do have a series that are werewolves and vampires and a whole slew of other shifters.
So you kind of got the gamut of supernatural beings. It's always interesting, like in fiction, like especially in urban fantasy and paranormal romance, witches are supernatural beings. But in life, I mean, I know a lot of witches. So,
yeah.
So are you also on that list of practitioners / wishes?
I am practitioner adjacent. I move in pagan circles or next to pagan circles. I am not actively practitioner of anything other than arts and crafts. I do call myself a craft witch because I can pick up pretty much any craft and do it. I may not be good at it. Like, I'm a crappy knitter. And I'm not very good at following crochet patterns, but I can. So I sew, I make jewelry, I make sculpture, I do scrapbooking. So I consider that some people are kitchen witches. You're a kitchen witch. Definitely.
Among many things,
100%. You put me in a kitchen and I'm like, okay, there's food and I have to make it edible. Not happening. However, you give me some paint, some glue, some scraps of paper, and I will give you a Christmas tree angel top out of candy wrappers. Because I've done that before.
That's definitely its own kind of magic, for sure.
Yeah. So I'm definitely I'm on the edges of those circles.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that that's like being on kind of in that pagan adjacent space has influenced your writing?
Yeah. Because because my characters themselves aren't necessarily going to be, Southern Baptists, or so my characters are going to have those beliefs to some extent in order to do what they do. I also think it lets me be a little bit more open to the options. So at one point in time, werewolves and vampires were the bad guys. They were evil demonic creatures. Heck, demons are evil demonic creatures. And yet, look at the show Lucifer. He's not this embodiment of was it brimstone and treacle and brimstone fire and all that stuff. And it's like, no, he's just struggling like the rest of us, with a little extra edge, because I can't make my eyeballs do the flames like he can.
Right. As I say, occasionally we get the glimpse of his demonic nature,
but right. And so I think being aware that there's other helps. I'm working on a mini series that is going into a series of anthologies that are coming up, and they're Vikings. And they're modern day Vikings, so they're Norse pagans. So knowing that information and being familiar enough with runes and all of that, I can hopefully represent Norse pagans appropriately in a shifter series.
And I would imagine being in the community, you are also exposed to the issues that Norse pagans have with certain folks that would like to co-opt their religion. So.
Yeah. Oh, and actually that is absolutely 100% included in this. That it's like, okay, let's explain why we're not going to let this happen. And these are our symbols, and these are why these are our symbols. And if you ever see the symbol used this way, that's the bastardization of it. And and the whole reason of it, and it makes sense. One, here we're going to denounce the use of our symbols within hate groups and white supremacy groups. And we're also not going to stop using our symbols because then they win.
Right.
So there's definitely a bunch of stubborn people who are sticking up for their symbology, which is good.
Oh, definitely, I agree. I mean, I don't consider myself a Norse pagan, and I don't really practice anything related to that. But it is I'm German and Swedish. Like those are my peeps, I guess. But
and,
not a huge part of my practice.
And it makes so much sense. So I wanted to, when I got these guys, because they're berserkers, and part of the mythos around berserkers is that they actually shapeshift on the battlefield.
Mm-hmm.
So of course I need to use that. Totally need to use that. But Viking was also a job description.
Yes.
Right. So I have a variety of characters here. I want them to be able to be portrayed, and in order to do that properly, I am fully addressing it. It's in the very first chapter of the very first story. Because, my first heroine is a mixed race African-American woman, and she walks up to these guys for whatever reasons. One of them happens to be a Black man. She sees the markings on his buddy, yells at him, because what the hell are you doing hanging out with these guys? And they're like, oh, hey, no, here.
Yeah.
If you will listen to us, we will explain everything. And so that gives me kind of a natural way of saying that these symbols mean other things. They don't mean hate.
Right.
And we reject them being used for that.
Mm-hmm. This is a good lead in to my next question. So one of the things, kind of related to this, is what do you hope that your readers take away from your work, and what do you feel like is your responsibility to your readers? Even though you're writing fiction, you're writing mostly what I would consider fun fiction. I mean, yes, there are dark themes and things, but overall it's romance. There's, like you said, there's happily ever after, a happy for now ending. So what do you feel like your responsibility is as a writer to your audience, and what do you hope they take away from that?
I want to write the reading equivalent of popcorn. So I want you to just mass consume. I love it when people yell at me that they didn't get any sleep. That is like my favorite compliment, because I want it to be that level of entertaining. I want it to just keep going at it until it's done. How did that happen? So in order for that to be there, there are certain things I don't want to read them. And I don't necessarily think everybody wants to read the dark things. So yeah, in The Wolves of Wet Waterfalls, yes, it does surround the manhunt for a serial killer. Yes, there are some not pleasant things that happen, but the grittier, harsher things are off page. They are mentioned in 3 lines or less, because that's all you need to know about them. You don't need those details. I won't write the kind of romance, I'm doing air quotes, finger quotes, where the main characters are mean, evil, or abusive to each other. And I know there are whole subgenres that have a lot of abusive themes in them. And I won't do that, because a romantic relationship, a healthy romantic relationship in the real world and on paper, I don't think should have that.
Yeah,
So
it's not something, I mean, like you said, I know there's like a whole subgenres out there of, those kind of tropes in romance and in urban fantasy. And I don't particularly enjoy it. I mean, I have read some grim, dark stuff that was interesting and engaging, and I, enjoyed the writing of it, but it's not something I would go to, like you said. It's not a book I'm going to pick up to unwind. Let's put it that way.
yeah. And I want to make sure I have things right. So if I'm going to include BDSM, which I don't, because it just isn't where my characters are. But if I were to, and if I do, I'm going to make sure that I get that information correct. I don't want to misrepresent something that's that big, and that potentially dangerous, and because it is real. I can make up all kinds of things about vampires and werewolves and all of that, because as far as we're aware, it's not real. But on things that we know is real, like, they should be accurately portrayed to a certain extent.
So you mentioned that you worked with sensitivity readers. How is that? I mean, do you feel like that's changed your writing, working with sensitivity readers? I mean, again, to our full disclosure, like, I know that this is an ongoing topic in the group that we participated in about making sure we're better at these things. But like, how do you think working with a sensitivity writer has changed your writing, or especially around, kind of fraught topics or things like that?
Well, I don't know if it has, because I haven't been so it's okay. As I'm processing here, backing up, we're going to back up to like the mid 90s and the 80s and the romance back then. And, I ate that stuff up like crazy. And fast forward 20 years, and I go back and I reread, fast forward 30 years, sorry. And I reread some of these books that I thought were my favorite. And they're like so problematic. The whole rape your wife until she obeys you trope. And it was a trope that got used so much. Or this, just stuff like that, or and abuse and of various levels, whether it was physical or mental. There was abuse there. Like, you're going to be shut up in this room until you do what I say, and not handled in a light or fun manner. So, because I started rereading romance before I started writing it, and I'm like, I don't know if I can do this. I need the modern stuff. And noticing that in modern books, it was okay for the characters to fall in love in the first chapter. And they didn't have to hate each other. And they didn't. So I don't know if my writing came from a point that actually needed. Now let me erase that. My writing will come from a point where I'm attempting to not need correcting. I am 100% open to correcting. So if I write a multiracial character, or I write a character who lives in Hawaii, I want to make sure I get their stuff right. I'm not writing the experience of this person growing up, but they are a character in my world, and I want to make sure I at least have their representation better. One of the first stripper books I wrote has a pansexual character as the main character, and he really encouraged this very kind of, I'm not going to call her quiet or mousy, but she kind of was quiet or mousy, sheltered character. He wanted her to try other things. So while they're actively dating, he wants her to date other people. He wants her to date women. He wants her to date men. And I included that first date that she went on with a woman. And I, after, I released it. I thought it was great. Went back, like, even 2 years later, I'm like, I didn't do that as well as I could have. And basically removed the scene and reduced it to, well, that date didn't go well. Because I didn't do that. I didn't represent it properly.
Mm-hmm.
And I could have if I had paid better attention to things. So that show, I'm open to being corrected. I'm open to learning. So if I did it wrong, I can fix it. And if I did it really, really wrong, I can pull a book. So
one benefit to being self-published. And you have that kind of control. Yeah.
So with the character Emmy in Fallen Star, again, I'm not writing the Hawaiian experience. I'm writing the experience of, I can now talk to dead people. And I am recovering from a major accident in my parents' backyard.
Mm-hmm.
That is her experience that I am bringing forth. It just happens to take place in Hawaii, and she happens to have grown up in Hawaii. Therefore, these are elements that have to be included and have to be accurately portrayed. So, little things like, so I know in this one happens to take place on Maui. Well, the center of the island of Maui has a higher elevation than the coast. I was referring to going north and going south, and it's like, no, you're going up island or down island.
Mm.
Or you go down to the beach. You don't go north to the beach. You go down to the beach. And it's like, oh, okay. So I want to make sure I have things accurate. I had a big flub, big mess up, and the they caught it, and they're like, this is a typical, you don't know the information. I'm like, this is why I have hired you, because I want to make sure that I don't have something that huge in there.
Yeah.
And she caught it, and I fixed it because I didn't know. And it wasn't a case of, I don't know when it's my world and da da da. No, it's like, I want to be accurate in the real world stuff. I want to make sure that my characters are adequately portraying and not being, I don't know what the word is, completely 100% not the way anybody that way would be.
Mm-hmm.
That, not eloquently said, but I don't want to write.
You don't want to write stereotypes.
Yeah, I don't want to write stereotypes, and I don't want to write a mixed race Polynesian girl like some white girl who grew up in the Midwest.
Right.
Because that might be what I am, but that's not what this particular character happens to be.
Yeah. So out of curiosity, like, if, like, say you wrote a book that had like a modern practicing witch person in it, do you think there's a responsibility to get that right for your readers, or is, because witches are also like part of this fantasy element, that it doesn't really matter?
Yes and no. It doesn't. So if I am going to write it's all fantasy, and the urban part of the fantasy is minuscule, then I think it's okay to have the witches being more fantasy witches. They can make glowing bubbles with their arms. They can be a little bit more swish and flick. But if I'm going to write, I'm also never going to call that witch a practicing witch pen, or a practicing Wiccan, or a practicing Norse pagan witch, because da 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 da, because they're not.
Right.
So I'm not going to have that connection. So like in Berserker Boys, they're berserkers. I'm not going to have the witchcraft or the necromancy or the rune readers, rune casters, weirds, the weirds. Finally got the right word for the women who read runes properly. Sorry. So, which are the weird sisters. So I don't have that element in there. So I'm not gonna, but if I did, I would make sure that I was doing some better research, had the right vocabulary in front of me, and was portraying that accurately, or as accurately as I possibly can.
Excellent. Cool. So you know about this because I sent you the list. So our last question involves a tiny bit of, I guess, game of chance. So I like to talk about those things you're not supposed to talk about in polite company. Maybe because I'm a Scorpio or just nosy or a writer brain. I don't know what it is. So I'm going to roll a die, I guess. I always want to say dice, but it is one. So it's a die. And
you literally have one.
I do literally. It's like awesome. A little D&D die. So 1 death, 2 sex, 3 religion, 4 politics, 5 money, 6 you get to pick.
Wait, haven't we been mostly talking about religion anyway?
Kind of, but maybe it's kind of a little more direct. It's adjacent. Okay. Yeah. I mean, adjacent. It's a podcast. I'm going to ask people all kinds of inappropriate questions. 2, sex. No one has gotten sex before. I'm so excited.
Awesome.
Okay. So
awesome. No, wait, before you ask your question, yes. I just have to fill this in. Years and years and years ago, I was in a book club. And at the first meeting, and this was a paranormal romance book club. And at the second meeting, first meeting, yay, we're going to meet, we're going to read these books. Second meeting, you walk in. And the first 2 books we read were just urban fantasy. There was no romance. There was no smut. And from that day on, because the first thing out of my mouth was, there was no smut in my smut books. I was the person that they always said, was it smutty enough for you? So
nice.
I just had to add that. So, okay. Because it fits the sex question.
So this question I wanted to ask is specifically for fiction writers, because obviously a nonfiction writer may come at this in a totally different way. But so does writing sex scenes squid you out, or do you get hot and bothered writing sex scenes?
Neither. So they don't squidge me out in any way, shape, or form. That is actually what led me to ghost writing. It's like, I could write those scenes for you. That's what got me thinking I could ghost write. And sometimes hot and bothered, but for the most part, no. Simply because I'm too busy trying to, does the hand fit here? Okay, if that hand fits there, then how flexible do you have to be for your leg to go over that way? And, I'm too busy working on the logistics of stuff, especially in the wet water vaults, because there are up to 5 people in a bed at any given point in time. And it's like, how do they puzzle piece together? So I don't tend to get carried away.
So it's more like logistics when you first write it.
Yeah. So, because like in a lot of reverse harem books, it's kind of a stand in line situation. It's when there's one female and all these guys. And I'm like, well, how boring is that? So in mine, everybody plays. That means people are playing together that you may not be comfortable reading about. But because this whole wait your turn in line thing is just bullshit as far as I'm concerned.
I have to admit, I hadn't really read any reverse harem until I read the series. So I didn't know that was the standard trope. So now if I do read anymore, I'm just going to be disappointed is what you're telling me.
Well, I don't know if it's standard, but I've read a couple of them where they do that. And I'm like, Well, I'm sorry. If that's the case, why did you invite everybody into the bedroom at once? It's perfectly fine for y'all to just pair off, but if you're going to invite everybody in the door, why are you just making them stand around twiddling their thumbs?
Mm-hmm. Since a follow-up question.
We went there.
So follow-up question. So like when you have written in public locations, can you write a sex scene in a public location, or do you feel like maybe that's not the thing to write while you're in a public location?
That's really hard. Oh my gosh, that is actually really hard, because that's when somebody with x-ray vision is going to look over my shoulder and be able to read what I've just written. That is, I've done it. It is like, I probably blushed the entire time. Probably just sit there blushed. They must think I have rosacea or something. I'm just red and I'm writing. Oh, public. Because I've done it, but it is not a comfortable situation.
Yeah, I did it one time and I was like, oh, I will skip over this next time because this was no.
It's not,
just no.
Seriously, it's the one time I actually think that the busboy cleaning the table behind me is reading what I'm writing.
Mm-hmm.
And
I am so vision impaired in many ways. So I write really big, like my font's really big on my screen. So it's very easy for other people to read it. And I was like, this was maybe not my best idea.
I can't say I do that, but it's still, that's when I think they're reading what I'm writing. I don't think that any other scene.
I can murder people and I don't think about it.
Yeah, I can murder people, don't think about it. I can just write them, get in a helicopter, no big deal. But second their clothes come off, the person behind me, I don't care how far behind me they are, they can read it.
It's so funny to me. Like we get so twisted up like that about sex scenes, but like in one of my books, somebody like literally rips this man's heart out. I wrote that scene sitting in a cafe with somebody sitting behind me and didn't even think about it.
And those are the scenes that you really should be worrying about.
Right. I mean, those are the scenes that'll get you reported to a list or something.
I'm even that way at home. So where my desk is situated, we have, there's stuff between me and the setup, but one of our other TVs is set up in kind of a little viewing play area behind where my desk is. And if somebody is watching TV over there, I'm like, I don't know if I can do this right now. It gets a little bit.
So what this tells me is that even though your writing brain is doing logistics thing, some part of our brain is also thinking this is sex. Yeah. It's enough to be slightly uncomfortable for someone to watch you write about this thing, even if you're not thinking about it in those terms.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. That is kind of a weird realization, isn't it?
Yeah, it's bizarre. I just hadn't thought about it that way, but it totally makes sense to me.
Like, yeah, this is door closed activities and I'm in a room full of people. Ooh.
Oh, no, it's good. Oh gosh, Lila, thank you so much for being on the show. This has been great.
Welcome.
I'm so glad it worked out. We had to reschedule many times because of COVID, holidays, insanity, all kinds of things. Yeah. So I'm glad it finally worked out.
Like few weirdly and randomly in strange directions. So
yes. Well, cool. Well, I look forward to your new books coming out and all your series, all the things you're working on. And thank you again for being on the show.
Thank you for inviting me on. It was fun. You asked good questions.
Oh, thank you.
And I like the dice. That's so fun.
WitchLit is a production of Thousand Volt Press and is edited by Keifel Agostini, who also designed our logo. Our music is Cosmic Glow by Andrew K. End, licensed from Pixabay. You can find transcripts and all our previous episodes at witchlitpod.com and follow us on Instagram and Twitter at witchlitpod. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow or subscribe and consider giving us a rating or review wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps other witches find the show. Thanks for listening and for reading witchy.